Hi, I'm Jaymie.
And I'm Stacey.
And this is the Body Smart Podcast.
And today we have with us Brian Keane, who is a personal trainer, public speaker, published author, podcast host, all things fitness, basically. So just like us here at Body Smart, Brian's a big advocate on working on mindset to help you to get to your goals. And on that note, we are going to be covering a lot of mindset stuff today, including how to start building your confidence, the role of identity when it comes to making changes in your life, and also how shifting from a hardcore mindset actually counterintuitively can be more successful. So let's start with that concept, because you said to me yesterday, I used to be really hardcore with tracking my calories, training balls to the wall. Now I'm not. But then you also said, I just got back from doing an ultra marathon. So what's the deal?
It's a really interesting one to start with, Stacey, for sure, because I think I've been through the ringer when it comes to my own fitness history, and the same with clients, because you end up getting a mirror back. You'll see them following and going down certain paths that were very similar to the ones that I was on. I would say sometimes it's a case of not what you do, it's why you're doing it. And when I think of my years in bodybuilding, and I was a competitive bodybuilder, I traveled around the world doing fitness model shows and shooting for magazines and things along those lines. And I had a very distorted view of myself at that time. I had terrible confidence in my own body and my image. I had to be and look a certain way, or I felt terrible about myself. My relationship with food was dreadful. I tracked and calculated every single morsel of food that went into my mouth. I was trained multiple times a day, and it was all just I always felt like that hamster on a wheel. It was just to feel like that I had my self-worth and I had my confidence because I looked a certain way. It's what I call in books and on podcasts, I had junk values. I had way too much of my self-worth tied to the way that I looked. And when I started coaching people, I started to see similar trends and similar issues that people had, and constantly living in that, I'll be happy now fallacy, where I'll be happy when I lose X amount of weight, or I'll be happy when I'm Y level of body fat, or have this amount of muscle mass, or I get a six pack, or whatever it is, depending on whether it was male or female. And once I started to see some of those mirrors back, it's so funny because I've helped, similar to you, not at the same level, my clientele, but they've helped me in so many ways, because you see the mistakes you made and the way you are in them, and then it kind of mirrors back. And fast forward to 2018, I did my last bodybuilding show in 2015. I did the Worlds in Vegas in 2015. And I said, that's it, I'm done. I wasn't living a healthy lifestyle. My daughter was born a few months before that, and that was I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm walking around like a brain dead zombie. I'm calorie depleted all the time. I feel horrible about myself. I have a really unhealthy relationship with food. I need to stop this, or I'm going to be a dreadful father. So I pulled myself out of that world. I started to focus a little bit more on healing my relationship with food, healing my self-confidence issues, my body dysmorphia issues, and growing the business through telling my message. A lot of my social media following through Instagram, through the podcast, through different channels came from me just sharing, these are things I'm working through. These are things I'm struggling with. And it brought a lot of people into my ecosystem to come through programs. And fast forward to 2018, when I did my first ultra marathon, which was the Marathon des Sables, which is 6 back-to-back marathons through the Sahara. And as you can tell, looking at me, for anyone that's just listening, I'm not built to run ultra marathons. I'm 5'8", I'm 85 kilos. I'm built like a little hobbit. I'm not built for ultras, but I got a lot of physical, or probably emotional and mental strength from doing things like running. It also made me a better coach, because I'm not built to run and I find it really difficult. It's very humbling. I gravitate towards S&C, CrossFit. I find those really easy. I look at a weight and I put on muscle. I've got good genetics for that. Dreadful for running. If I stop running for a week, my body just forgets how to run, and then I have to go back and relearn it again and get back to a base. But it makes me a bit more empathetic when I'm working with people, because you can see where their struggles are. And I went down that road for a completely different reason. It was to see what I could physically do with my body. And I don't track every morsel of food I eat now. I don't do any of that. It's more about fueling my body now. I don't look in the mirror and when I think of it, I dreadful body dysmorphia. Like I'd walk by every mirror and pull up my shirt just to make sure I still had abs. And anyone that's into fitness and into that,
I've been there. Like, especially when I was in my early 20s, like that was a thing. It was like you were very wrapped up in your own self-worth in that sense of just like you need to be lean all the time, and it was like if you wasn't, it was that's what it felt like. But that's also like what everyone else showed as success online, so you just kind of felt like you were falling in line. But it is,
yeah, I think I was very lucky because at that stage in my journey, I suppose I was yoga based rather than fitness based, and it wasn't like that.
Yeah,
so I was very lucky, but there was definitely that performance element to it. So you go on Instagram and people are doing like crazy poses, and you're like, oh, I'm not good enough because I can't do
it almost seemed like
handstand on one hand with my leg on my head. So it was more that.
Yeah. It did seem like the natural progression. Like you would start going to the gym, and if you went to the gym back like 10 years ago before it become like maybe even a bit like 15 years ago before it was like a real big thing, the natural progression was people would do that, and then they would like compete, or they would do a photo shoot. Like that just seemed to be the step that a lot of people that talk who got into fitness, or even fitness professionals. So you kind of like, oh, that's the path everyone else is taking. Maybe that's the path that I should take. But just to come back to something that you said a little bit earlier, I think a lot of that did bring on junk values, as you said, for people in terms of like you were valuing the wrong things. So what did you see those junk values as, and like what do you now see as like a healthier version of those values?
It's really interesting because I had those junk values for years and I didn't realize it. I think the first step towards any change is awareness, and I didn't have the awareness on it. And I put a section, and it's weird because when you write books, I wrote 4 books, 3 of them did way better than I ever dreamed. I had 3 best-selling books and literally changed my life in terms of the doors that it opened and opportunities that presented because of them. But there was a section in the second one, Rewire Your Mindset, where I was talking about competing and preparing for the Worlds in Vegas. And most people won't get this because they're not into fitness competitions or bodybuilding shows. But I was posing in front of the mirror, and a guy came in and just made a harmless enough comment on, oh, your legs used to be bigger. And I fixated on that for days after. I'd say I spent the next hour looking in the mirror from every angle at my legs going, oh my God, they used to be bigger. What am I doing? I'm going to be in Vegas in a few weeks. Everyone's going to laugh at me. People are going to be like, what are you doing up here? Massive imposter syndrome. And it wasn't until I got out of that world several months later and I remembered that experience and I thought, okay, I didn't have my legs are small issue. I have a self-worth issue. And when I unpacked it and started to ask better questions around it, I realized that when I saw my legs being physically smaller in the mirror, it was tied to how well I would do in shows. And how well I did in shows was directly tied to my self-worth as a person and my confidence as a person. And the story in my head went, you're going to be laughed at, you're going to do terrible in this show, you know, people aren't going to respect you, people aren't going to like you. Once I removed myself and realized, well, that's not true. That story is so untrue. That's something that I'm just repeating in my head over and over again. It's like the bully between your 2 ears. And I said, okay, no one cares about this except for me. I'm wrapped up in my own story around this and no one really cares. So I realized then, well, that's a junk value. That's something that isn't actually making me a better person. So I started to focus on, okay, well, what are the things that are really important to me? And one was my business, which was huge for me for pulling me out of that. I was okay, how can I serve more people online? I told you yesterday, Stacey, like I was the ultimate bro, ab selfie wanker on social. Like you go back to 2014, 2015, it's ab photo from this angle, ab photo from that angle. And I realized I wasn't providing any value to people through this. So I said, okay, I'm going to use my social media to try and help. I was like, I've been working as a personal trainer for years. I'm a certified nutritionist. I have knowledge in this space and my own personal stories. I'm going to start to use my channels to help people. It's when I set up the podcast not long after and started to try to serve and give back. You know, I can't remember who had the quote, but it's the line that you lose yourself when you find yourself in the service of others, or you find yourself when you lose yourself in the service of others. And so I started to focus on that. I started to look at my relationship with my daughter. I thought, okay, well, the last thing I want is to have a girl grow up when she's 14, 15 and have serious body dysmorphia issues because it's what she saw from her fucking dad. Don't mind from anywhere else, society or the female influences in our life or anything along those lines. So I started to reframe what was valuable to me, and it was what I was providing to people online, how I was showing up as a dad, how I was showing up with my friends and the people that I met offline, how I was as a son, all of these things. And when I started to shift my attention to that, a lot of these junk values kind of fell by the wayside. And it's not like it still doesn't come up. You still realize that, oh, I'm spending too much time on this. This is a waste. But you have more awareness around it. So that was kind of what I call going from 0 to 1. It was what got me out of it initially. And now it's just a case of what you pay attention to is what expands. You just keep focusing the energy in the right places. And I try and live a life now that, like, I'm into health, I'm into fitness, I'm into performance. Like, I do the ultra marathons and I still do all those things. But the reason why I do them now is completely different to why I would have potentially done them, 10 years ago.
Healthier drivers.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's also, you're still scratching that itch of, like, I want to see what I'm capable of. I want to compete and feel my self-worth in some way. But it's more about what your body can do rather than what it looks like.
100%.
And also competing, for anyone who hasn't competed before, it's you look your best, but you feel your worst.
Competing in bodybuilding.
Yeah, competing in bodybuilding versus in near enough every other sport, you're competing at your best. When you go and do an ultra, you are the fittest you have probably been. You've primed your body in every single way. But when you compete for a bodybuilding show, you look your best, but you feel your worst, especially on the day. And it is like for a lot of women that compete, they'll lose the periods and they'll struggle to get them back for a long period of time. And a lot of guys, the libidos go, testosterone, like hormones are all over the place. It's a nice walk through hell going through the sort of the prep for it, isn't it?
How it's called a sport, I'm not really sure. It's like
it's
quite insane.
very loose term. I used to, even when I was competing, I'd say it was like, you can't compare it. It's the same as you wouldn't call, a dog poodling show a sport. That's what I always thought about bodybuilding. I was like, I can say it because I'm competing. I was like, I'm in the middle of it. So like, I could make the argument and I didn't get hate for it because they're like, well, you're competing, you can say it. Whereas if you're not competing, you can't say things like that.
Yeah.
Or people get really offended.
It kind of comes back to what we were talking about before we started recording, of being your own echo chamber though, because like you say, you couldn't say it to other people who were in the sport, but everyone around you was in that same headspace. So everything that you were thinking probably felt normal to think because everybody else was thinking it too and feeling it too. So it's interesting that you say actually when you're working with more, regular people through the coaching, that's when you had them bring up a mirror to what you were thinking and be like, oh, hang on a minute. This probably isn't the healthiest.
Yeah. Well, normal is relative. Like that. That's something that I still remind myself to this day, that your normal is so relative to you. And when you're in an echo chamber, sometimes the best step towards change is just to remove yourself from that echo chamber initially, because you can start to see that, oh, we actually all think the same way and it's normalized. And, this can work in two ways. I know David Goggins says it's someone I'm a big fan of, where he'll say, make sure your normal is the achievers are high, that the normal is you run 200-mile ultramarathons and everybody in your circle does that. And then it becomes a higher level that you're working towards. But that can work in the opposite as well. Like when I left bodybuilding, I had to switch gyms. I had to stop spending time with certain friends. But the same goes when you try to get into a fitness journey. Like you have anyone, and you've seen this with, a woman or a female or male in some cases that need to lose weight. But all their other friends are going out at weekends. They're going to restaurants multiple times a week. They're not staying on top of nutrition. They're not living that lifestyle. And it's very difficult. My mom used to always tell me that if you lie down with dogs, you get fleas. And that's kind of the equivalent of you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So you need to be very mindful of that and aware of that when you're trying to make a positive change, especially in the beginning, because change is so difficult at the start. It gets easier as it becomes your new normal, like you said. But in the beginning, it's very important that you protect that environment. Maybe remove yourself from that echo chamber. Get some confidence built up by repeatedly keeping those small promises to yourself and then growing and building from there, because it's a lot easier when people start to input and have opinions on the way you're eating or the way you're living, when you've built up a bit of self-confidence, like you said yesterday, that turning point where people are like, oh, my body's changing. This is my new lifestyle. This is how I live now. When you get to that point, it's easier to knock away negative comments or opinions that don't support who you're trying to become. But in the initial stages, it's very important that you're aware of that and you put active plans in place so that you don't get pulled, back down the rabbit hole, for the lack of a better expression.
Yeah. A huge part of that circle at this moment in time that we're all living in, I feel like social media is that one of your five. So for me, I remember when I was having those probably a little bit of issues with like body dysmorphia and comparison, and then I go on my Instagram feed and I look at my explore and it's just shredded guys all the time in absolutely amazing shape, to the point where like that was like my whole explore feed. And that's all I'm seeing. So all I'm constantly getting is a comparison of like, and I wasn't fat I had a 6-pack, but I felt fat next to these guys, because I'm just looking at them and they're all like stepping on stage, or they're posting photos of them stepping on stage. And I'm like, it just took me like a while. I mean, I was like, shit, like I just went on like a massive unfollowing spree, because I was like, this is harming me, seeing that on a consistent basis. So unfollow, and then they've made a point of just like going on the explore and just like purposely like looking at like 40 different things. It was actually like house transformations before and after.
I'm just trying to mess up with the algorithm.
Yeah, just messed out. So when my explore feed would look different and my recommendations would become different. Yeah. And then I was like, I mean, that did make a big difference, because you can't help it. Like if you're seeing people on stories, or you're seeing people on social media and you're seeing their content constantly, like that comparison is the thief of joy. But if you just remove yourself from seeing it, then you don't even get the opportunity to compare. But when you are just seeing it all the time, it was. So that made a big difference for me, because it was just that consistent focus on comparison and not being enough, versus like actually just removing it and changing my social media environment made, such a difference.
I think it's a really good point, because social media has like that double-edged sword, doesn't it? Like it can be the most difficult part if that's all you're seeing, but it's also got so many opportunities to create that circle. So if your in-person circle is going out all the time, they have a certain way of eating that doesn't align with what you want to do right now, they're not particularly active, you can create like a whole community online, and it's just as powerful sometimes if you curate the right community. And whether that's following certain people on Instagram, or there's so many Facebook groups out there. Like, I don't know, everyone's a Facebook fan, but for me it's been like a lifesaver in certain parts of my life, like especially becoming a mum and like being stuck in the house, was like living through these Facebook groups where you just felt like, oh, I'm normal. Like these things that I'm going through are normal, and these are the things that you can do to be healthy, to approach it. So I think it can be used for the good. Yeah,
100%. I'd say like my feed now I just feel like it's like motivation, funny, education. Like I just get started and a bit of a catch up on sort of friends. So for me, it's like I really enjoy social media in that sense, because I get a lot from it. But previously that hasn't been the case. And I think like curating your following and being on top of that, even having a point where you like kind of check over it every 3 or 6 months and be like, those people aren't making me feel my best, and just clearing people out. And also, I think I've said this a couple of times, sometimes you've got people who are like friends or family or people that you wouldn't want to maybe unfollow. And I'm just like, there's a mute button. You can mute them. So you don't have to unfollow them in case they check, and you don't want to have that like awkward conversation, but you can mute them. Which
is way better than real life when you can't.
Yeah. That'd be amazing. Imagine I know a few people, I'm like, I wish there was a mute button here.
It's a Black Mirror episode, that, isn't it?
Yeah. But that's such a great point, because there's a phrase that I got from James Lawrence, who did 50 Ironmans in 50 states in 50 days, and he lives by the controllables, which is a very heavy into the endurance space of fitness. But when it comes to curating your feed, that's a controllable. Yeah. You can curate your feed, and it's one of those small things that can have a very amplifying effect on everything else, because you're not being triggered. Like, think about how many times you look at your phone every day, and if you're getting triggered every single time, that's all adding up. It's the death by 1,000 cuts, and you can control that.
Yeah.
No, and it's also tapping into what's your inner talk, because your inner talk is so important. But we have our phones now that kind of take over that. Like, we distract ourselves from our thoughts by looking at our phones. What we read on our phones is replacing our inner talk. So if what you're reading, seeing, hearing is positive or negative, has just such a big impact, as much as what you say to yourself, which is huge.
Yeah, completely agree.
It's the adult dummy in a lot of ways, or pacifier for our American friends.
Yeah.
That's
you're right. Yeah.
Oh, the baby's crying.
That's so true. I can't talk. I guess that's definitely me. I'm like, I'll just disconnect now, and I don't want to think about that. That's uncomfortable. Let's go on Instagram.
So when it comes to confidence, like you've mentioned a few times, that's something you really had to rebuild up around different values. And I know it's something that a lot of our clients have struggled with, that they've got to a place where they've just lost all confidence in themselves because they've tried so many things and it hasn't worked and they don't feel like themselves, they don't have any energy. So what would be your kind of step-by-step approach to go from that rock bottom to start rebuilding?
I think two things. I think you do this fantastically with your clients. I know from talking to you and seeing the people and the testimonies. Firstly, I think it's important to know that going from 0 to 1 is harder than going from 1 to 10 with confidence. So the initial stage is the most difficult part in terms of aligning the expectations on the front end. After that, confidence is built by just repeatedly keeping promises to yourself. And that goes in both sides. If you say, I'm going to get up at 6 a.m. and not set my alarm or hit the snooze 5 times, that's a small promise you set for yourself every day that you could potentially start the day off and win. If you say, I'm going to prepare my meals and bring them with me to work the next day because I work in a school or I work in a hospital and there's always going to be biscuits or cake or chocolates. And like, I was a teacher for 4 years, so I know what the canteens and the rooms look like. There's always a box of Quality Street or biscuits there. So if you don't have your food and you're hungry at 1 o'clock, you're going to potentially pick at those. And if you said, oh, well, actually, I'm trying to live a healthier lifestyle, I've decided I'm going to become a person who makes better food choices, and you don't bring your food with you, it makes it so much harder to not have those biscuits or those chocolates.
Yeah, willpower only goes so far.
It runs out.
Yeah, and you might do it for a day, 2 days, a week, but like, you know, then you have a bad day on day 8 and it's just like, oh, you haven't got your food. Then the hand goes into the chocolates.
And that's what happens. Yeah. And confidence then, and think about it like a seesaw. It goes both ways. If you're reaching for those biscuits and you've said, oh, well, I'm deciding I'm not going to eat those, and then you did on a Wednesday or Thursday because you didn't prep or you felt stressed or willpower ran out, that negatively impacts confidence. So you get people, and what I love about what you do with Body Smart Fitness is you're getting them to focus on those small wins, whether they know it or not, because they've been in a place in the past when they haven't done that and they've not kept those promises that they said they would. And I think it's really important to start small. Like, I always picture confidence like legs on a table. If you have a table, we have a table here for recording the podcast. It's got 4 legs on each side. But if you had 1 leg in the middle of the table, you could knock that quite easily. And that's how people's confidence is. But every time you keep a promise to yourself, regardless of how small, you add a small leg to that table and you make it sturdier. And then every once in a while, you'll hit something big, like you'll squat a weight you never thought you could squat, or you'll hit a weight target you didn't think you could ever hit, or somebody that you never thought would compliments you. Something big will happen and it adds another leg to that table. And then now your confidence is a lot sturdier and it's harder to rock it. Yeah. So I think it's important that you do it step by step, knowing that there will be things that happen that give you a lot more confidence, but it doesn't happen overnight. Again, I wish it did. It'd be so much easier. You put it into a pill and sell it, but it doesn't. It's one of these gradual things and a conscious decision you make most days, more often than not, to keep the promise you set to yourself, regardless of what that is, whether it's to move more or to sleep better or go to bed earlier or prepare your meals or make healthier food choices when you're on the go, whatever that is.
That's a great analogy for it as well. And I think that's a huge part, is like a lot of our, you know, we get to the point where we kind of ask clients before they come into the program, you know, we ask them, you know, how confident do you feel that we could get you results? And one of the things, you know, if we don't get a 10, because if we don't get a 10, it means we haven't done a good job on the call that we've had. We'll often get like a 7 or 8. And it's not because of what we presented to them. It's the lack of self-belief they have in themselves, because that they've actually got 10, 20, and 30 years in some cases of the evidence saying, I can't do this. I can't stay consistent. So they do not have the confidence to say, I'm a 10 out of 10. I'm going to crush this, because the evidence that they've got says otherwise. So, you know, that's a huge part of that, is, you know, having that table and starting to get those wins in again and starting to build that confidence, because then after a month, it's like, hey, like, I've got a month of evidence. I've got an extra leg on that table. And then you get 2 months in and you've got another leg. I mean, that confidence really starts to build, and you start to have a lot more self-belief in terms of going out, oh, maybe I can't do this, or it's not for me. And it turns into, oh, I can do this and I need to keep doing this because of how great I'm feeling.
Yeah.
Something I really recognize in that like level of confidence is I was at a place back in the past where I didn't try and put legs on the table. I was just like, it's got 1 leg. It's fine. Just don't knock it. Everyone stay away from it. It's fine. So I totally recognize when people are like, well, no, I don't have any confidence, but I'm fine. I don't want to try and make a promise to myself because I don't believe that I'll keep the promise. So it's better to just have one leg. And I think that's where you were saying going from 0 to 1 is harder. Because
how did you get out of that, out of curiosity? Because that's a very difficult mindset to bring into building confidence, because it's, I know I have a problem, but I'm choosing to not fix it. How did you go to that point where you decided I'm going to improve this?
Yeah, I think it was yoga, really, because that hasn't got an end goal or an end game. And so it was, for the first time, it was something I was doing just because I wanted to do it. There was no end state. It was just enjoyable. Yeah, there would be things that I thought were inspirational. I'd love to be able to do that one day, but I never had like a timeline, because that's not the philosophy of yoga, is it? So you just turn up and you do things, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I can do the splits. Who knew? And so without knowing, I was building legs, but it was like stealth legs.
Yeah.
So that's something that I always am so grateful that yoga came into my life, because otherwise I would have just lived in the, I'm too scared to even try, or I don't want to put myself in a position where I might let myself down, so I just won't challenge it. And I think that's a position that many of our clients have found themselves in, and they just, why would you put yourself in a position where in inverted commas, you're going to let yourself down?
Yeah, and it makes sense. And I think that's a lot of people forget, is like the goal isn't to get healthy for Christmas or for next year. The goal is to get healthy and stay healthy, just like you were saying with yoga. That is the philosophy of what you're trying to do there. You're not playing a finite game. You can play over finite games, like maybe developing a skill to do a handstand or squat a certain weight. That's a game, because once you've hit that goal, it's like, well, what now? You know what I mean? Like, or once you do that bodybuilding show, or once you have that vacation or holiday, well, what now? Versus if you play more of an infinite game of like, the goal is to just get healthy and continue to stay healthy forever. You're playing a very different game alongside maybe these other games, and it's a different mindset to have, because a lot of people are just fixated on the finite, which is, I need to lose 20 pounds. I need to lose 20 pounds. And it's like, but what then?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, what?
But I even think saying I have a goal to get healthy, it can almost be that pressure on people of like, well, what's healthy? And particularly type A personalities who are like, okay, well, what's that in terms of my blood pressure? What's that in terms of my BMI? Like, there are people, and I'm one, who's like, you can't just say something vague like that. Tell me what the goal is and I will get there. Yeah. But I will only commit to getting there if I believe I can commit to getting there. And I think that if you can completely take the competition out, or the numbers, and you're just doing it for the enjoyment of, I feel better, I like doing this, this makes my life more enjoyable, that's when it is a complete shift.
I think it's very important to define, like what you said there, what healthy means, because that's such a subjective term. I think one of the things that I see a lot of people confuse, is the difference between health and fitness, because there is a point where they overlap, but there's a point when they're no longer together. I would argue some people who are extremely fit, even when I'm training for an ultra marathon, I'm not healthy. Running 100 miles a week, you're not healthy. Like, you're fit, but like I go and get my blood work done, and things are all over the place because you're excessively training. Cortisol's too high. That's why I have a back off period when I come off the back of a race, and I'll do 6 months that's just pure sleeping more, eating healthy, training less, a back off, but that's my space. But I think it's important for people to realize that health and fitness intersect, and you want to find that sweet spot where they intersect, but they do go off on two extremes. So it's important to define what healthy means.
Definitely. And it varies for different people, you know what I mean, in terms of like how they manage their emotions, manage their stress. For some people, healthy might be exercising 3 times a week, you know, and just overall having a more active life. For some people, it might be 5 times a week. It'll vary for different people. But yeah, like, I eat the way I do now because it makes me feel good and look good. And like, that's in alignment with my values. And that's just a game I want to keep playing forever. I exercise because of the same reasons. I'm not doing it for a specific goal. I've got other goals alongside that, like skill-based goals. But yeah, like, I'm just doing it because it's like, I've got no issue having a takeaway or eating out. But if I'd done that all the time, like, I feel like shit. I mean, that would affect my work and how I sleep and everything else. So it's just, those games that you're playing in that sort of space in terms of like what healthy is, I'm playing them because they just make me feel good. And that's the game that I enjoy playing the most.
Yeah. I think everyone needs to define that for themselves. Like
Yeah,
you have your version. I think everyone will have a similar version,
course.
but it's important to define it on the front end.
Yeah, and I think that's something we take a great amount of time when we bring someone into the program of what is this vision that you're trying to get to. We're not going to tell you, right, your vision is this weight, this amount of physical activity. Like, you tell us, what do you want to feel like? What do you want to do in your day-to-day life? And let's work towards that, which is kind of the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I think there's always going to be like markers to an extent, you know what I mean? So there's going to be general health markers that you're going to possibly want to get people to, but again, some people don't want to get there. And again, that's like kind of where that can be a little bit grey sometimes, in the sense of like, yeah, you want to get to a place where you're generally healthy, or why you're going to, you know, certain just health issues or chronic health issues, you're going to have a higher statistic of avoiding, just if you're able to get to maybe like a healthier weight, or a healthier body fat, or a healthier like height to waist ratio, or whatever it is, and having like a general good general level of fitness. But again, it's like you said, there's that crossover and point of like where some people will get to and be like, actually, I'm happy here, I'm happy at this weight, I'm happy at this size, I feel good, I feel confident, I'm dressed in a certain way, I've got good energy. And it's like, great if that person is exactly where they want to be. Like, it's 2 thumbs up, like we've done our job, you've done your job. But yeah, people getting clear on what that is and what those values are that align with that is super important for them to be able to just keep playing the game. And the goal is to play the game forever. It's not to play it to the point where it's just like, I can't keep exercising because I have to do it 5 times a week, and it's so much effort and strain on my life, and I've got a busy job and 2 kids and this and that and everything else. Sorry to interrupt, just a quick ask. If you are enjoying this podcast, we do ask if you would go and hit that subscribe button, because our goal is to be able to help all of you guys become body smart, and the way we can do that is by getting better guests on, more experts, and the bigger this podcast gets, the more guests we can get on here.
Well, the sweet spot.
Yeah, finding that sweet spot and the values behind it, you explained really well when you kind of went backwards of like, why is this so important to me? And like, what does it mean to compete? And what does it mean to win? It's really hard to break that chain down for people. And I think a lot of people just go, well, I just do want to feel better, look better. But how would you recommend somebody can get that bit deeper and see what is truly driving me, and then maybe become a bit more critical about, do I really want that to be driving me?
It's a layered question for sure. I think one of the most underrated motivational tools for anybody trying to make a physical, mental, or emotional change is knowing why they're doing it in the first place. And I normally get people to ask, and I do this myself, is you keep asking why until you get to the root answer. And an example that I use regularly, and this one's probably one that a lot of people can relate to, and I'm sure this goes a lot more layered deep. But when I was working one-to-one as a personal trainer back in 2015, I had a girl come into me who was about 20 pounds overweight, or in her mind had 20 pounds to lose and wanted to lose 20 pounds. And I asked her, I was like, okay, well, why do you want to lose 20 pounds? And she goes, well, you know, I have 20 pounds to lose. I was like, okay, well, why do you think you've got 20 pounds to lose? And she said, well, I've got my sister's wedding coming up soon. I was like, okay, well, why do you want to lose 20 pounds for your sister's wedding? She goes, well, I want to fit into this dress that I really like. I think I'd look really good on the day if I fit into it. I said, okay, well, why do you want to lose 20 pounds for your sister's wedding to fit into this dress? And she said, oh, well, actually, there's a guy going there that I really fancy. He's going to be at the wedding. I was like, okay, gotcha. So as a personal trainer working with her at the time, not only did I have a potential carrot to, you know, figuratively say, look, remember why you're here. You want to look a certain way. Now you can go healing the food relationship and all that as you go along. But I also needed her to understand why she was with me, because I have 20 pounds to lose is not a good enough reason to eat a certain way, to make lifestyle changes, to move more. In a lot of cases, I want to feel more confident in myself so I can fit into my dress because there's actually someone I'm really attracted to going to be in this place in a specific date. That's a big difference in terms of the intrinsic motivation for the person. So I think if you just keep asking why enough, you'll get to the root answer in a lot of cases. For people that are struggling, for motivation is a big one. Like, I always think of motivation, you know this better than anybody, that it's like a wave. It comes in waves. It's a feeling. And it's not the thing that's going to get you there, because you can listen to a song and get motivated. You can listen to this podcast and get motivated. But then life happens and that motivation goes again. It hits you like a wave. That's why what you do consistently every day, like tell me what you do every day and I'll tell you where you'll be in a year. And that applies to all areas of your life, your habits, your eating patterns, your movement patterns. Tell me what you do every day and I'll tell you where you'll be in a year. So it's important to set up those daily habits alongside anchoring why you're doing it in the first place, because that can lead to a lot of positive change in people's lives in all areas. But in the case of physical and losing weight or body composition or whatever it is, that can help a lot from my experience.
I love that example because often people kind of look down on it's not a good enough reason because you want to wear a dress on a wedding. And actually what you've just got to there is why the dress on the wedding, like what is behind that? Because actually all of us have these subconscious reasons why I want to feel good on holiday or I want to wear this dress to this event. It's not about wearing the dress or wearing the bikini. It's about what other people are going to think or what one person's going to think. And even that can then start a conversation of, well, does it matter what that person thinks? And if it does, cool. And if it doesn't, hey, maybe you can have a different goal. So I think that's a really nice example.
It's layered. Like it's layered if you keep going deeper and deeper. And the example I used was just more for me as the personal trainer at the time to be able to bring her back to that so that she could stay on course. Because like I was with her 3 hours a week in the gym, 3 sessions a week. There was how many hours outside of that I'm not there. So getting her to understand that. And again, it's weird because when I think of, and I hate to bring this back to me, but it might give a useful example for people on a weight loss journey that are listening. When I did bodybuilding competitions, I always did it for other people. It was for the external validation from others, peers, family members, friends, all of that. When I went into ultra marathons, it was all for me. And there's a quote I heard, I think it was in Tim Ferriss's podcast, that would you do this thing if you didn't get to post it on social media? And when I was competing in bodybuilding, doing fitness model shows, there was no way I'd have done it if I didn't get the post. If I didn't get to put the post up, I wouldn't have done it. The ultras that I've done were all for me. I struggled so much. I was bullied as a teen. I had all these emotional, deep-rooted issues from early on in my life that affected my confidence in a negative way. And competing in these ultras, for me, gave me a lot of that confidence back because it allowed me to back myself when I actually never thought I was somebody that you could back. And getting that was all internal and for me. And I would have done the ultras that I've done, the Sahara, the Arctic, a few of the extreme ones, if nobody knew about them because of all I got personally from them. So sometimes you have to start moving. You can't steer a parked car. Sometimes you actually have to move towards a goal to see, is this actually what I want to do? And you can ask, well, am I enjoying this process? You know, is this outcome important to me? Is this for me? Is this for others? And you can start to ask the questions because you can't do that sitting on a couch at home. You have to be moving towards a goal. So it's important. And again, I can speak firsthand that sometimes you'll get started because of the opinions of others. How many people have you worked with who have came to you off the back of a negative comment from a family member or a friend?
Of course.
And that's been their starting and their catalyst. And now they're doing it because they feel better and they feel energized. So why you start is less important than the path you're on.
Yeah, a lot of people start from pain, which, as you said, can be a useful fuel. You know what I mean? Like if you're going to have pain and feel shit, use it. It's energy in a lot of ways, you know. So like if that can help you go from 0 to 1, which you said is one of the hardest parts or the hardest steps to take, you know, that's huge. But then even coming back to the fact that like motivation, you know, it's finite, it comes and goes. But often in my experience, motivation comes from being in motion. So when you go from 0 to 1, and then you go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, 2, 3, 4, and 5 start feeling easier because you've been consistent. You build that self-belief. You start seeing results. And like now you feel more motivated because you're like, hey, I want to keep being consistent. I want to keep feeling good. And then when you get to step 10, it's like now the driver can change from, hey, I'm doing this because they called me fat or they shamed me in a certain way or if I felt a certain way. Now the driver turns to, well, I just want to keep feeling good. I want to keep staying consistent. I want to keep my promises to myself. To the why changes, which is, I am a little bit like that with the sense of like, if you are in pain or if you are not feeling good or someone said something, like instead of like you can use that as fuel in those situations. And it's not it's just very important that you can maybe use the negative fuel in the beginning to elicit the action or the start. But then it is important that you eventually take a step away from that, because you don't want to just have these unhealthy drivers driving your actions constantly. Like, it's not it's a bit of a prison to be living in, to be honest. But you at least can use some of that as fuel in the beginning to get you going. And to be honest, it's often what drives a lot of people to take that first step.
Well, pain and hurt and hate is a very hot burning coal. Like, the analogy I've used in the past is it can light up your house or it can burn the fucking thing down.
Yeah.
Like, and so you need to be very, very careful if that's your motivating driver, because at some point that same thing that was the catalyst and got you up and running can actually make you miserable down the line. So you sometimes, as you said, check in with it, because at a certain point you're going to focus more towards, maybe the gratitude that, I'm glad that person said that because look at my life now. And you're shifting away from that hate and that pain and that negativity towards something more positive.
Yeah.
That's where self-awareness really comes in. And we talked about self-awareness earlier. If you are reflective on all the things that are changing in your life and all the positive things that come along, it naturally shifts. Like, your whole outlook on what you're doing and why you're doing it shifts without you having to say, you know what, I'm going to let go of that negative driver, because it becomes meaningless after a while, doesn't it? The big things that are changing for the positive kind of outweigh what even got you started, but only if you consciously bring your attention to them. And I think that's the real beauty of having a coach or having even like a fitness buddy along with you on the ride, who can say, hey, do you realize you just did this for the first time? You never would have done that 6 months ago. And then people start to actually give themselves credit and then recognize where they are. Where they were then becomes like forgotten.
Yeah, completely agree.
So when it comes to other mindset tips and tricks, you've got a wealth of knowledge. You've written a couple of books on the subject. If there was like one magic trick or skill you could give every single person, what would it be?
The gift of self-awareness.
Oh, yeah.
100%.
And I could, like, we say that, and like, we've
it's like every
like a
episode.
couple of guests we've spoken to as well have said that. But I think if there's anything that can be taken from that, and please do expand on it, it's like just the power of that. Because honestly, the last couple of people that we've spoken to have all said, again, self-awareness, and it just comes back to you. You need to know yourself.
Yeah, well, like, success leaves clues, and I know it can sound like a trite cliche when everybody's saying self-awareness, but the truth is, what drives me is going to be different than what drives you, Stacey, what that drives you, Jaymie. Like, there was a time in life where, like, Body Smart Fitness is a great example. Like, I love what you're doing, and it's so inspiring from the outside. And there was a time in my life when I'm like, I would love that. I would love to be running that. And then as life changed, I was like, oh, actually, I really like having a small team and being remote and living in the west of Ireland in the middle of nowhere, quite close to where I grew up with friends and family members. And I wouldn't change that for anything now. And otherwise, there was a time when that comparison, instantly you go into comparison mode. And that self-awareness, and just it shows up in business, it shows up in body composition, it shows up everywhere. So you're just asking those questions. I think one filter I put everything through, will this thing, person, or opportunity that's presented itself, is it going to nourish me or is it going to deplete me? And just putting everything through that filter. Yeah,
I love that, because you can use it for anything. Like, this plate of food in front of me, this friendship, this TV show. That's brilliant.
Yeah. A huge one on that, and I had a distorted version of this, which was, and I think a lot of people do, which is you believe that your version of success is what other people's version of success has. So if you feel like you're successful and other people don't have the same version of your success, so a lot of people deem them as unsuccessful, when it just couldn't be further from the truth. Like, everyone's version of success can look wildly different to them, and that's okay. Like, who are we to judge if those people are genuinely happy with the lives and the success that they're having? Because I have definitely done that before, where I've thought like, oh, I'm not successful because I'm not where they are or what they've got, and it's just another trap of that comparison, instead of just being genuinely happy with like what you've got and the path that you're on.
The false consensus bias, where you assume that everybody else thinks the same way as you do. We all have that in some capacity. It's interesting though, I did a video or a reel that got a lot of traction a while back, and this is something that probably, because it's something I struggled with, was we as a species and as human beings tend to take things in isolation. So we'll look at somebody that is killing it in business and we go, oh, fuck, I wish I had that. Not realizing that, well, maybe their health isn't where it needs to be, or their relationships aren't where they need to be. Because there's a good chance, and some people are very successful in all facets of life, but the people who are incredibly successful in specific areas normally comes because the cost of putting the time, energy, and focus into that comes at the cost of neglecting other things. And some people are fine with that. But we look and go, wow, I'd love a relationship like that, or I'd love a business like that, or I'd love a physique or a body like that, not realizing that all these other things, we want to take it in isolation. And when I stopped realizing and stopped asking, will I switch lives with this person, and take everything they have, their baggage, their history, everything, you realize there's actually not that many people you'd switch positions with because you're happy for what you have. And that can knock you out of that. It's something I still do to this day.
It's a common trait that you see, or traits that people have who are in society's standards are successful, but they have very unhealthy drivers in terms of getting them there. And a lot of people like would not swap places with that because of just the drivers that are keeping them going and going and going and going and going. And that's often what allows them to become successful. And you see this on, like I read Will Smith's book recently, same thing. You see a lot of these just really successful CEOs or big companies, and they've got all the money and all the things that people say that they want, but you don't realize like what is driving them to get up at 5 a.m. and get up and live that life. And it's like, often if you really, really knew what they like were going through on a day-to-day basis, you probably would not swap. You'd be like, chill.
It's not just would you want their life, it's do you want their inner life and their outer life. Yeah.
It's huge. And I think that's the other part of it as well is like balance is like a funny word that gets thrown around. And that used to be a huge thing in the fitness space where everyone's like, oh, it's all about balance. Like just have a beer or have a gin and you can be balanced. And I think you often have to be successful in anything, whether it's your body, whether it's your career, whether it's this, you have to go through phases of being unbalanced. So like losing weight or successfully losing a lot of weight is an unbalanced way of living. Like you're in a calorie deficit, you've got to go through a season of losing weight and be unbalanced in other areas of your life to eventually understand what balance now can look like and have a more healthy relationship with it. And it's the same in business and often your career. Like when people are trying to like climb the corporate ladder, you're doing longer shifts, longer days, to try and get to that next sort of step or that next sort of level. And I think that is sometimes misconstrued in terms of like people don't fully understand that, like, there's which makes sense. There's often a level of sacrifice and not being balanced to achieve the goal or the outcome that they want.
Well, micro imbalance from macro balance, I think, is a nice way to look at it. That you have to, at certain seasons and stages of your life, have that micro imbalance. Like, with Nate having a 2-year-old, like that takes up so much time, energy, focus. You're not sleeping as much. You're not going to be as balanced in other areas of your life because of that. But you wouldn't trade that for anything. That's micro imbalance. Well, okay. Yeah. When you look back in a few years, you wouldn't give up Nate for anything. Is what I mean. You have this micro imbalance in the moment, but it sets up for macro balance down the line.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you brought up balance there because that's where the health and fitness splits. Like I always think of the example, like if you put your head in the microwave and your feet in the freezer, you're balanced core temperature in the middle. And that's sometimes how the fitness industry can be. It's like, okay, eat super clean Monday to Friday, have what you want at the weekend. So it's important to know that balance, it can, because it gets thrown around in the health, wellness and fitness industry. And for some people, the balance is, being able to go out and have the dessert in a restaurant and not feel bad about it. For somebody else, it's, a binge restrict cycle, from Monday to Friday to Saturday, Sunday. So it's important as well. And again, you're brilliant at educating your audience on this. I try and do it on my podcast too, but not everybody in the fitness industry has that. Some people have disordered eating patterns that they bring in. There's some people
that gets wrapped up with discipline.
Wrapped up with discipline, and they're unaware of it themselves. And that's okay. But sometimes when people are listening, it's important to realize that not everyone has the awareness around their own behavior, that you don't want to mimic and copy them because that's their version of balance. You need to ask the question for yourself what it looks like in your own life.
Yeah. It has to be an informed balance because you can end up in cycles, like you were saying, that Monday to Friday eating clean and then going all out on the weekend. That isn't often an informed choice. That's just a habit. That just happens. When you step back and you assess it and you say, does this actually make me happy? A lot of those people would be like, well, no, because the only reason I'm so hardcore Monday to Friday is to make up for the Saturday, Sunday. But I can't get myself out of it because then It's just a cycle.
Yep.
So when you give yourself a chance to step back and say, like, is this actually a balance that I want? And then if it's a yes, you make peace with it. So when you were saying, you know, the balance with like having a toddler and work or training, at the moment, I've had to take a massive step back and accept, you know, I can't give as much to my work as I wanted to. I can't give as much to my training. Like I said yesterday, it's a PB if I get to the gym twice in a week. Like that's my baseline expectation at the moment. Don't even care what I do there. If I turn up, I'm happy, which would not have made me happy a couple of years ago. But you've made that conscious choice. Like this is where my energy is going to sit and everything else has to be here to let that happen. And I think that's self-awareness again, isn't it?
It's redefining success as well. You know what I mean? Because like success at different stages of your life can also look different as well. Like you're saying, success now is just showing up to the gym twice a week. As you know, I was had this conversation come up to Stacey. I was saying, oh, I'm doing these new workouts and I'm hitting PBs and it's like it's taxing on my body. And I was like, God, I could never do this on 3-4 hours of sleep. Now there's just no way I would recover or be able to hit them. And then you went on to say that, and it's like, yeah, it just shifts. And I guess it's being okay with that shifting as well, because things do just happen to you in life, you know, like it happens to us all, the good and bad things, and it's having that resilience and self-awareness again to be able to shift what maybe success needs to look like at different stages and seasons of your life.
Yeah, I get people to ask the question, and it's the acronym for WIN. How can I win? What's important now? And every stage of your life and season of your life, you're going to have different answers to that question. And in your case, what's important now 5 years ago was smashing your workouts multiple times a week. What's important now is getting your foot in the door so that you can just mentally feel better and physically move. And I think bringing back and asking that question, how can I win? What's important now? Because the answer will change depending at the stage of your life, but it's something that you can come back to and use as an anchor question.
That's really good. Really like that. What's important now?
And the concept behind it is so important, because I think sometimes when someone goes through a journey, they work on what are my values, what are my priorities, and then become fixed on those being the values and priorities. And then life changes and they're still trying to work to this list of values and priorities, but that actually isn't what it is now. And so there's this conflict because the actions that they're trying to take to align with the old values and priorities just won't stick, because that isn't actually what is important now. So I love that concept of coming back to it regularly and asking again. Do you have like a journal kind of practice, or how do you do all this reflection?
I, for years, journaled. I was somebody that did a complete 180 on things like gratitude journaling and just journaling in general, because I was very much, oh, that's woo-woo. Like I lived in California for years, and anyone that journaled and talked about that 15 years ago was like, you know, hugging a tree and, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like by all means, if you want to hug a tree, go hug a tree. But at the time I was like, that's not for me. I'm very kind of Irish, old school. I'm not going to journal. I'm not going to do any of that. Whereas 5-6 years ago, probably even a little bit longer, I would say since my daughter was born, she's 8 now, I started to physically write, and I started to gratitude journal to try and shift my mindset, because my mindset by its nature, everyone has that negativity bias. It's the thing that kept people alive thousands of years ago, and everyone has a kind of hardwired to be negative towards certain situations for the most part. Some are better than others, but I was heavy into the negativity. That's all. I always went to the worst case scenario and catastrophized things. But when I started to gratitude journal every single night, I started to rewire my mindset, and I started to focus on the more positive things. Now I do less journaling, but I do a check-in at nighttime, every night before I go to bed. And it's normally in the major sectors of my life. How was I today in that podcast or online? How did I show up with my daughter? Was I present, or was I thinking of other things? How was I, with my partner? How was I with my loved ones? How these things that are important to me, I just do a check-in. I normally just go 1 to 10. Like, how was I? I'm not allowed to do 7. That's another thing I stole from Tim Ferriss, because otherwise you're like, I was a 7. Everything's a 7.
Average.
At the average.
Yeah.
And so I just check in and go, okay, I was a 9 at work today. Or, I was a 6 with my daughter today because my mind was elsewhere. I didn't sleep. And that's okay. There was a time when I would beat myself up for that. And now I go, well, just try and be better tomorrow. Try and get that balance. It's the micro imbalance for macro balance. And like at weekends, I don't work. I switch off. I'm not on social media. I don't check my phone. I'm nowhere. So my score for work-related stuff is going to be a 1 or a 2 on those days, or a 0 even.
Or is it a 10?
Or potentially a 10.
If that's the intention.
And if that gives you the refresh so that Monday you are back on it.
I like the reframe. I'm going to take that reframe. 100% positive reframe. But yeah, that I think just having something that you stay accountable either to yourself or to another person. I'm one of those people that in the early stages of relationships, because I had a lot of false narratives and stories that I followed, and I struggled with relationships areas of my life historically, as opposed to things like fitness. I never needed a personal trainer or a coach. I was accountable to myself, probably too much so in terms of my obsessiveness with training and eating, etc. But I needed the accountability of relationship coaching in my 20s. So I had a coach when I would get into a romantic relationship who would hold me accountable to stupid shit I was doing. And I'm like, oh, yes, I am doing that. And I'm repeating these patterns and behaviors. So sometimes you need the external accountability. Sometimes internal is fine. And it just, again, comes down to self-awareness on what you truly need.
One of the things actually we really encourage our graduates to do is to develop that self-check-in, because they have a check-in with their coach every week. But when you take that away, when you graduate, you don't have a coach anymore, maybe. Well, then what? But it's such a habit that is so beneficial, whether it's weekly, whether it's nightly. I have the same thing every night with my husband. We have a little list of questions that we go through. And it just also helps you just reconnect with what's important now. And if you're not living in accordance with your values, it's feedback. And then tomorrow's your chance to bring it back into balance. So that's a brilliant takeaway tip. I love that.
Yeah.
So it's been an absolute pleasure today having you on, Brian. And I'm sure some of our listeners have taken a lot of value from what you've said, but this is just the start. So where can they go and find? You've got 650 episodes on your podcast, right?
I've got 450 of the main, and then probably another 200 from bonus episodes and different exclusive things that I put up there. Yeah.
Wow.
So if people want to go and listen to more of your nuggets, where can they find you?
The Brian Keane Podcast, definitely. Yeah, we did a great episode a while back, Jaymie. So definitely check that one out as well. And we've such an overlying the way we try and serve people. It's healing that food relationship, getting you on the right path, getting your mindset right. That's a big focus. I do bring on endurance people and athletes as well, just to kind of balance it out. But 60 to 70% of that content is all based around mindset, weight loss, and getting you onto the healthy path.
And your books as well?
Oh yeah, they're everywhere on Amazon, bookstores. The Fitness Mindset, Rewire Your Mindset, The Keen Edge, Mastering the Mindset for Real Lasting Fat Loss. A trend in terms of the titles, but they're available everywhere books are found as well.
Fantastic.
And your social media handles are?
Brian Keane Fitness, Instagram. I'm on everything, but Instagram's the one that I check my DMs on. So if you're trying to get me directly, that's the one to hit me up on for sure.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much again for having me.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, then I definitely recommend you search out episode 42 with our very own coach, Sarah. We're talking about body image and perfectionism, but this time through a more female perspective. So search for the Body Smart podcast on your preferred platform.